Brindleford was not the kind of town that birthed legends. Tucked between rolling English hills, it was a place where the most exciting news might be a farmer's prize cow or a new hymn sung in church. But in the autumn of 1872, a name passed in whispers through cobblestone streets and quiet parlors: Emma Voss. Emma was known to all. Once a skilled seamstress, she was the woman neighbors turned to when lace was torn or morning gowns were needed. She had delicate hands, sharp eyes, and an unshakable calm about her. Yet when tragedy struck, the very poise that once drew respect unsettled the townsfolk. Emma's grief was not loud or weeping. It was silent, watchful, and obsessive. And at the center of that grief was her daughter Clara, now gone. Clara Voss had been a child of unusual kindness. At only 10, she carried in her small frame the maturity of someone who had already seen sorrow and knew how to comfort others. She rescued fallen sparrows, gave away her bread to beggars, and sewed tiny patches on the clothes of poorer children with her mother's help. "She'll be a healer one day," neighbors often said. But in the cruel winter of 1871, scarlet fever swept through Brindleford like a thief in the night. Entire families fell sick. Clara's laughter faded within days, her little body succumbing to the fever. When her coffin was lowered into the frozen earth, the sound of Emma's silence was more chilling than any wail could have been. After Clara's burial, Emma withdrew from life. Curtains in her small brick house were drawn tight, blocking out the light. Meals were left untouched. Work ceased. She laid out Clara's dress each morning, set her place at the table each night. Children who passed the Voss house whispered that they heard Emma's voice through the shutters, speaking softly, as though her daughter still sat at her side. "Don't spill your milk, darling. Fold your hands for prayer." The line between mourning and madness blurred. In that era, it was not uncommon to seek comfort in what was called a memento mori, a post-mortem photograph of the deceased. These portraits, though macabre to modern eyes, gave grieving families one last semblance of presence. So it was that Emma invited Edmund Hale, a traveling photographer, into her dim parlor. His profession had long since numbed him to death's stillness. He had photographed infants in cradles, husbands beside widows, brothers beside sisters. But never had he encountered a request like Emma's. She wanted Clara photographed as though alive. When Edmund arrived, Emma had already dressed Clara's small body in her favorite blue frock. She had brushed her hair into neat plaits, even dabbed rouge on her pale cheeks. Clara's form, preserved by the winter chill, lay in a chair beside which Emma sat with unnerving composure. "I will place my hand here," she told Edmund, resting it on her daughter's shoulder, "just as I always did when she was restless." Edmund hesitated. Something about Emma's steadiness unsettled him. But he could not deny her request. It was, after all, his trade. The room was eerily silent as Edmund worked. Each adjustment of the camera's tripod creaked through the stillness. Emma did not flinch. Her eyes were wide, fixed not on Edmund but on Clara, as though the girl might stir if she watched hard enough. "Hold still, my darling," Emma whispered at one point, her voice breaking Edmund's concentration. "The gentleman is nearly finished. We mustn't blink." Edmund's hands trembled as he poured chemicals. He felt something heavy in the air, not the odor of death, but the weight of love clinging too tightly. When at last the image developed, Edmund laid it on the table. Emma leaned over it, gasping. To her eyes, the photograph was miraculous. There she sat, hand upon Clara's shoulder, both faces calm, eternal, united. But Edmund saw something else. Clara's eyes, though lifeless, seemed to follow him. Neighbors who later glimpsed the photograph swore the same. Some whispered that Emma had breathed part of her soul into the image. From that day, Emma lived for the portrait. She placed it on the mantelpiece, framing it with fresh flowers, lighting candles before it, as though it were an altar. Each night she whispered lullabies to it, rocking slowly as if Clara might awaken from the stillness of paper. Friends tried to console her. "Emma," "You must heal," they urged. She replied with a serene smile. "Why should I heal when Clara is still here with me?" At first, Brindleford pitied her. They brought meals, offered prayers. But soon, pity turned to unease. Mothers pulled their children away from Emma's gate. Boys dared each other to peek through her windows at night, claiming to see the flicker of candles and hear the faint strains of lullabies. "She lives with ghosts," one villager muttered. Another claimed, "Emma Voss has chained her daughter's soul." By spring, Emma summoned Edmund again. This time, her request went further. She asked him to paint Clara into a meadow, smiling among flowers. Edmund paled. "Madam, the girl has gone." To falsify her presence, "Do not speak of her as gone," Emma snapped. Then her voice softened, almost pleading. "Just once more, sir. Let her live in the places she loved." Edmund's conscience groaned, but her desperation broke him. He complied. One portrait turned into several. Emma sold furniture, heirlooms, even her late husband's pocket watch to fund more images. Clara on the seaside, Clara in a garden, Clara playing a piano she had never touched in life. In every image, Emma placed herself beside her daughter, eternally unchanged. Her house became less a home than a shrine. One evening, Edmund penned Emma a letter. "Madam, I cannot continue. Your devotion is admirable, but it strangles you. Clara's rest must not be disturbed. Art cannot replace memory. Beware, for in holding her too tightly, you may lose yourself." Emma tore the letter to pieces. "No man shall tell me how to love my child," she whispered into the candlelight. Months later, Emma appeared at a local charity auction, clutching one of Clara's portraits. She insisted it be displayed, saying proudly, "My daughter lives still, see? She has only stepped into eternity." The crowd fell silent. Some women wept, unable to bear the sight. Others left in discomfort. Emma's grief had crossed into performance, and the line between reverence and horror was too thin for many to stomach. Reverend Whitfield, burdened by concern, gathered neighbors to intervene. They visited Emma, urging her to let go. "Clara's soul belongs to God, not to your portraits," the Reverend said gently. Emma's eyes flashed. "God may keep her soul, but her laughter, her face, her touch, those are mine to keep." Her voice was calm, but her grip on the portrait was unyielding. The intervention failed. By midsummer, Emma's house had transformed into a gallery of the dead. Every wall bore Clara's likeness. Candles burned constantly, their wax pooling like tears. The air smelled of smoke and flowers, heavy and unnatural. Neighbors avoided her. Some swore they saw Emma brushing the portrait's hair. Others claimed she spoke to it in the tones of a mother scolding her child. Whether true or imagined, the stories spread fear. At last, Edmund returned uninvited. He found Emma frail, her face lit with a feverish devotion. "Mr. Hale," she said with eerie warmth, "you will help me again, won't you? Clara needs a new gown." Edmund shook his head. Instead, he placed a small, leather-bound sketchbook in her hands. "Fill this, Mrs. Voss. Not with what death has made, but with what life once was. Draw Clara feeding birds, singing, laughing. Keep her in your memory, not in these hollow shadows." That night, Emma stared at the blank page for hours. At last, she lifted a pencil. Slowly, awkwardly, she traced Clara's outline. Clara holding a sparrow. Clara reading aloud. Clara giggling as her mother sewed. When Emma finished the first drawing, she wept. Not with despair, but with the strange release of remembering her daughter as alive, not preserved in death. Over weeks, sketches filled the book. Emma began to open her curtains, letting light return. She sat in her garden, drawing, sometimes laughing quietly at remembered mischiefs. Though she never discarded the photographs, they lost their hold on her. She began teaching local children sewing, sharing stories of Clara as if the girl's spirit guided her hand. The house no longer reeked of obsession, but of remembrance. In 1876, a terrible fire swept through Brindleford. Flames devoured homes, including Emma's. Neighbors rushed to her aid, fearing she would collapse when she saw her gallery of portraits reduced to ash. But Emma surprised them all. She emerged clutching the sketchbook, miraculously spared by the flames. Her face was calm, almost peaceful. "The fire cannot take her from me," she whispered, "because she was never in the photographs. She has always been here." She pressed a hand to her chest. Emma Voss lived quietly until her passing in 1888. When townsfolk entered her rebuilt home, they found not photographs but walls lined with sketches, Clara playing, laughing, running, alive. Emma had finally transformed grief into memory, obsession into love. Her story lingered in Brindleford as both warning and inspiration. Love is not in clinging to death's shadow. It is in keeping the light of the living heart. And thus, Emma Voss's obsession, once whispered as madness, was remembered instead as the triumph of a mother's love, a portrait not of death, but of life everlasting.